It's kind of like this. It's like if cats have 9 lives, I have 9 cats. Do you know what I mean? It's like 9 times 9, 81. I've come this close to dying so many times in my life or having my life in jeopardy that when you're kind of living your life on the edge of life, you're gonna have plenty of opportunities where your life might end, and that's what makes it exciting. Well, let me tell you a story of just one example of this. What I have discovered is, and what I have found is, many people want to move forward in an idea or a thought by garnering as much support as they possibly can. And in order to gain that support, that drive to gain support for your idea, what many people do, and it's actually an error, it's a major error, is they will talk about their lack, what they don't have. Like, or I'm tired of this, or this should stop, or when is this going to stop, or when are people going to wake up, or when is this going to happen, or it's always out of a lack mentality. It's kind of, again, like a poverty mentality where in order to gain support, it feels like you have to tell everybody what you're against, right? We're against this, or we're against that, we're against this. You have to be really for something, right? So if you're against something, you're anti. You're anti the thing. I'm anti something. Okay. But in order to gain true support that actually moves into action and produces results, you have to be for something. The word to be for it is to be pro, right? Pro life, right? Pro, to be for something. What I've found is that many people want to be anti something when they really have to be for something. So I want to tell you a story of how my life was in jeopardy and it really turned out to help someone be for something. Some people get so frustrated because they're like, well, you have no idea what I'm up against. I have nothing going on. If you're going to be for something, you just have to look around and work with what you do have. God's telling Moses he's got to go teach the people and set them free. And he's like, well, what do I work with? And God says, well, what do you have? And he goes, I have this staff. He goes, we can work with that. Do you see what I'm saying? Jesus wants to feed the multitudes, and all of his disciples are like, well, how are we going to feed him? He goes, well, let's ask everybody here. Ask the 5,000 people that are here if they've got anybody. Some guys, I got a couple little fishes and some little chunks of bread. We can work with that, right? So you work with what you do have in order to bring the multitude in. I get invitations to public speak up in Canada, and it was in this area called Onion Lake, Frog Lake. It's the First Nations people. In America, we would call them the Native Americans or Indians, but in Canada, they're the First Nations people. They're First Nations because they were the first in the nation, right? They're the original people to the area. So you go up into Saskatchewan or Edmonton. In Canada in general, the First Nations, I believe, have over 300 tribes or near 300 different groups of people that they would call First Nations groups, right? And in that, many of those groups, just like they in America and the United States, seem to have a socio-economic challenge where they really don't have all the things. Well, I'll give you an example. I go up there to speak, and I'm like the keynote speaker in this event, and I come into the community, and there's not. It looks like something from like 1800, like cabins that are kind of nailed together and rough looking, not even engineered or carpentered. There's no running water. Let me say that again. This is like 2019, 2018. No, 2018. No running water. No running water in a first world nation. No bathrooms, no running water, so they have to pump their water. They have to use outhouses. And I come to this community, and they have this giant tent. Like, think of a tent, like white and yellow striped tent that you'd go to like Barnum and Bailey three-ring circus, right? And I'm the center for part of the circus. So I go there. I'm like, hey, I'm really honored to be here. I really appreciate you, putting this together. Anytime someone asked me to speak back then, I really didn't. I just said, if you've asked me, I'll come. We'll figure it out when I get there. That was kind of my mandates. Never say no, and don't worry about the finances. I'll be taken care of, right? And so I went up there, and I go, let me check into my hotel for the night, and then I'll come up and I'll speak this evening. So I go back to my hotel. I'm checked in. I'm resting and relaxing, and all of a sudden I get like a heavy-handed knock on my door, like boom, 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 boom. I'm like, whoa, that's either the building's on fire or something's going on. And I open up the door, and it looks like it's two guys, and they look like they just stepped out of Yellowstone, the TV show, like the Native American guys, like the chief, and then his security guy with the cowboy hat and the big belt buckle and a gun on his side and a little blazer on. and they look a little rough. And he's got a little ponytail here, and he's got the bolo with the turquoise on it. I mean, literally, still sterling silver, just right out of a picture book, right? Well, to say that I'm intimidated is an understatement. It's just me. I'm in this little hotel. I'm in a nation I don't know, and there's two guys that look like they mean business, and they did mean business, and they told me so. They said, "We have business with you." And I said, "Well, state your business." And can we come in? I'm like, "I'd like to know what your business is first, and if I could have your name, that would be ideal, right?" So they introduced themselves to me. One's a chief, and one's the security of the chief, literally like right out of Yellowstone. And I said, "So you're with the First Nations here?" And they're like, "Yeah, kind of, but we'd like to talk to you." I'm like, "Come on in." So I welcome them in, and there's like a little tiny bistro table, two-seater. So I let both of them kind of sit, and I sit on the edge of the bed, and I'm like, "Tell me what's going on." And they're like, "Well, you're going to come and speak to our people. We'd like to get to know you, but before that, this was the chief of that specific tribe and group of people I was going to talk to that night. And this chief was coming on behalf of what he called the chief of the chiefs. I don't know. He had like a name, but he's like, "Hey, every year we get together, and the chief of the chiefs is going to be here, and he would like to talk to you tonight." And I'm like, "Okay." Like when? He's like, "Now. He'd like to speak with you." And I'm like, "Okay. What are we going to talk? What does he want to talk about?" He's like, "He just wants to talk to you, and we're here to take you there." So now I'm getting in the car with two guys, right, that look like they're from Yellowstone. One's obviously packing a weapon, and we're driving, and we get there, and my every instinct in me is like, this could be my end. But also, when you're at that edge, it's like you never feel more alive than when you feel like you might die. You never feel more desperate to hear clarity and to be totally in tune with yourself when you think this could be your end. There was a complete awareness of what I was doing. I was getting myself mentally, emotionally, spiritually ready. As I was driving in there, I pull up, and it's just again the big yellow tent in the middle of the village. And I'm like, "Well, where's the chief of the chiefs?" And like, "He'll meet you in there." So I walk in. This place must have been 4,000, 5,000 square feet. It was huge, right? 25, 30-foot tall beams holding up this canopy. And it's kind of, the sunlight is coming in. It was in the middle of the summer, so it was nice and warm in there. And the sun's coming through this yellow and white. So there's like yellow and white kind of lighting on the inside. It literally feels like another dimension in space and time. And so I sit down. There's two chairs in the middle of this thing, right? And apparently that's where I was supposed to sit. So I sit in one of the chairs, and I'm waiting, just sitting there waiting. And then about 20 minutes later, the chief of chiefs comes in, and to say what he looked like would literally be like a chief of chiefs, except he was maybe a little bit more fit. He had a little bit more well groomed suit, cowboy boots on, right? So the chief of the chief walks in. He's well groomed. He sits down right in. He goes, "Join me in the middle." We sit literally right in the middle under the center pole, right by the pole, and he introduces himself. I won't mention his name, but he just introduces. We shake hands. We sit down, and I just say, "How can I help you? What can I do for you?" He goes on for about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, of giving me what I would call his grievances. In other words, he kind of shares the history of his people, how they came to be, how the white men came into their land. And he starts at the beginning, right? And he goes through and says, "Hey, that's why we're in the condition we're in." It's all these stories. But he doesn't put it in a position that, hey, it's an excuse or he's a victim. He's like, my goal is to get my people out of this and to move my people out of this pain and out of this sorrow, poverty, alcoholism, suicide, murder, rape. All your major crimes are rampant in their community because there's a lot of alcoholism, drugs, violence, gangs, because it's poverty. And as he's talking, I'm like, again, solutions are just coming to my heart and to my mind, and they're quickening, almost like, some people say that came to my mind. I'm not that smart. It came to my soul. I'm not that deep. It was in my spirit. I don't know where is my spirit if it isn't everywhere. I can't tell you where it came into. I can just tell you that it overwhelmed my thoughts, feelings, and emotions. I had solutions for this people's problems. As he's talking and as he's sharing, it's like he's talking aloud, and it almost like his voice kind of goes down, and the voice in my head starts talking, saying something like this: "Ask him about his mineral rights. Ask him about who owns the ground that they actually stand on. Ask him about what's under the ground that they stand on. Ask him about internet access and do they have access to technology and can they run fiber optic to their communities. Ask him why don't they have running water. So I am just like getting all this information, and while I'm hearing him talk, I'm listening to the voice that I can only describe to you as coming from within, but from without. It's out there, but it's in here at the same time. It's hard to describe. Maybe you've had similar experiences in your life where you're not really sure where this intuition or this voice or this gut instinct or this sixth sense, or you're listening to your gut. People call it a million different things. I don't want to give it a name. I'm just describing the process and how that flows to you, right? It's infinite. It never stops. It just keeps coming. So he kind of finishes with his grievances, and he's just honoring me for coming there to speak and to teach and to train his people. And I asked him a couple questions. I said, "I've got a question for you, Chief. On the ground we're standing on the ground that we sit on, who owns the mineral rights for you and for your people?" He says, "Well, we do." He says, "We own the mineral rights and we own the sky rights." He says, "There's basically like a way that the Canadian government and them work together, but they own the rights to the ground." And he's like, "Why do you ask?" I said, "Well, you're the chief of chiefs. How many tribes?" He's trying to tell me. I said, "Is that true across the entire land?" He says, "Yes, it's the same for everybody." And uh, and then in my mind, in that infinite circle of information, I said, "You need to meet with the Chinese. You need to meet with the Chinese." Just it just came to me, and they're going to want the oil in the ground. I said, "Is there oil in the ground?" He says, Edmonton's right up the road, right? There's You ever heard the Edmonton Oilers, right? The hockey team. Uh, Wayne Gretzky, I think, played for him, right? Number 99, greatest hockey player ever. So they were called the Oilers for a reason because there's so much oil in that ground, and now they're fracking that oil up there. So there's just oil latent within the ground everywhere, including on these what we would call in America reservations, but there it's the First Nations people's land. As I say that, I said, "You should meet with Chinese people." He says, "That's incredible." And he goes, "How did you know that?" I said, "How do I know Chinese people? I mean, what do you mean? How do you know? How do I know what?" He goes, "How did you know I'm having a meeting today with the China with a representative from the Chinese government?" I said, I did not know that, but it sounds like a good thing. You need to meet with them, right?" So the same way I knew that information, the same way that I was sharing that information, it brought credibility instantly for him. And he says, "Tell me more." I said, "Well, they're going to make you an offer, and then you're going to have offers from some Canadian government and business people and some American people, government, but you need to take the Chinese deal." And he's like, "That's crazy because that's exactly what we're debating on is which deal to take." I said, "Take the Chinese deal," right? Now, I'm not part and parcel of China. I'm just being obedient to this word of knowledge or this information that's coming to me that I'm sharing. I'm not going to scrub it through my own personal politics or geopolitical bullshit in my mind. I'm just telling them what I heard. Eventually what ends up happening is he has this meeting. I go and preach and teach and train and talk and do my thing that night, and the next couple months later I get a call from the chief of chief, and he says, "That meeting I had with the Chinese, we accepted their terms and conditions. They paid better than anybody else. They were willing to put in the infrastructure and the work. We basically just had to give them over the rights. They started drilling, and this is at a time when oil was at its high. I think it was $200 a barrel or something like that." And he's like, "We're pulling out in the hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of revenue per day out of the ground in just this one campus," right? And he's like, "We're now starting to expand that." Now, I haven't followed up with them from that to see how they did with it. It wasn't my job. I did my job. I delivered my message. I gave him my word. But that what ends up happening is that you can break poverty by looking around and solving problems with what you do have. Sometimes, oftentimes, most of the times, many times, you are standing on the very ground of the solution to your problem. A lot of people think I need some sort of external or new thing to enter in my life to solve an existing problem in order for me to get to where I want to go. But you have to look at what you do have, right? What do you have? And take what you do have and work with it. Even this very podcast that I'm doing right now, I started it because I do have it. I can do it, right? It's there. Got a camera, got a tripod, got some light, got a table. Let's go. You have to start with what you do have, and then it'll build into what you wanted to have or what you think you wanted to have, probably greater than you could have thought, think, imagined, or even dreamed of. Start with what you do have. Every problem has an answer to it. Poverty can be broken by simply working with what you have in your hand. And that's how I met the chief of chiefs. Well, needless to say, I didn't die that day before, right? And in fact, I believe I was able to help deliver a message of life. A lot of times those dichotomies work together. Like this fear for your life is actually a fear for life, not a fear of my life, but a fear to preserve life and to preach, to teach, to train, to give, to share prosperity to a people. So don't confuse this fear of your life for the fear and the sanctity of preserving and gaining people's lives, right? What greater love would you have for someone but to lay down your own life? And that doesn't mean to die, by the way. It means lay down your own thoughts, feelings, and agendas, to listen to the infinite words that are coming at you, to share those things. And when we share those types of things, they always bring life. So it's like this: you walk through this doorway, like I did through this little tent. I'm listening for the truth. As I'm receiving that truth and I gather that infinite knowledge of truth and I present that truth, it brings life. You go through the way, you listen for the truth, it brings life.